Saludos amigos y amigas del Ecoexploratorio Museo de Ciencias de Puerto Rico. Le doy la bienvenida a todas estas personas que nos están viendo a través de Zoom y a través de nuestras redes sociales, porque estamos aquí en la ciencia virtual, traída gracias a Corteva Agriscience, porque estamos en la semana de la innovación, específicamente sobre la agrociencia. Y esta semana hemos tenido, mire, un sinnúmero de excelentes recursos de parte de Corteva y de colaboradores de Corteva, donde hemos estado discutiendo sobre la sostenibilidad, la agricultura y el de hacer accesibles los alimentos y la siembra de estos a grande escala y a pequeña escala como en los huertos. Me gustaría grandemente que las personas que nos están viendo a través de Zoom y las personas que nos están viendo a través de las redes sociales vayan escribiendo en el chat desde qué municipio nos están viendo. Yo voy a estar siendo la moderadora en el día de hoy y mi nombre es Esmeralda y yo estoy ahora mismo en Plaza Las Américas en el municipio de San Juan en la exhibición del Ecoexploratorio en el segundo nivel. Así que todas esas personas que nos están viendo a través de Zoom y a través de nuestras redes sociales pueden ir escribiendo en el chat desde qué municipio nos están viendo. Estoy viendo por ahí que Abigail nos está saludando, Rose también, qué bueno que estás por aquí, y que Abigail nos dice que es desde Ponce, Migdalia nos dice las buenas tardes, saludos Migdalia, y que está desde San Juan, saludos Rose, que nos está viendo desde Corozal, y Belis nos está viendo desde Caguas, un saludo y Belis nos está viendo desde Dorado. Mira, aquí tenemos a gente de todas partes de Puerto Rico. Mira, Débora, saludos, Débora, que nos está viendo desde Juncos. Vemos por ahí a través del Facebook que Madeline nos está enviando un saludito y que nos está viendo directamente desde Guayama. Christopher nos está viendo desde la Inter de Barranquita. Saludos, Christopher. Mira, gente maravillosa, qué bueno que están aquí con nosotros en esta semana de la edición de la innovación en conciencia virtual. Así que les recuerdo que en el día de hoy tuvimos por la mañana una sesión súper buena sobre la inversión en la comunidad junto con Luis y Elizabeth. Si se perdieron esa transmisión, no se preocupen porque queda grabada en nuestro Facebook, porque se transmitió también a través de Facebook Live, así que la pueden volver a verificar esa y todas las presentaciones que tuvimos durante la semana. En el día de hoy tenemos, mira, Débora nos hizo una pregunta, excelente pregunta. ¿Hasta cuándo estarán las exhibiciones de los temas de esta semana? Pues mira, la semana de la innovación se acaba mañana con dos sesiones, nuevamente, una a las 11 y una a las 3. Las grabaciones, como estaba mencionando, de todas estas de esta semana, de las ambas sesiones de por la mañana y por la tarde, desde el lunes, quedan ya grabadas a través de nuestro Facebook. Así que pueden entrar directamente a la pestaña de videos en nuestra página de Facebook y ahí quedan entonces grabados todos esos videos. Así que van a tenerlos accesibles para su uso. Eso es en confianza para ustedes. Y en el día de hoy vamos a tener a un profesor que su nombre es Dr. Alok Arun. Su presentación va a ser en inglés, porque les quiero hacer la salvedad, pero no se preocupen que en la sesión de preguntas, si usted va a hacer una pregunta en español, yo con gusto vamos a hacer lo mejor posible para traducírsela al inglés para que el Dr. Alok se la pueda responder. El doctor Alok nos va a estar hablando sobre Blue Biotechnology, Farming Algae for Food and Nutraceuticals in Puerto Rico. Y es bien interesante porque el doctor Alok tiene una vasta experiencia, ¿verdad? Es un científico que tenemos en el día de hoy y ahora mismo es empleado que es un profesor asociado, ¿verdad? De biotecnología de plantas en la Universidad Interamericana de Puerto Rico. Así que es un investigador científico principal en distintos proyectos que han sido financiados a través de propuestas con la National Science Foundation. Su área de interés, ¿verdad?, principal de sus investigaciones es el desarrollar diferentes estrategias y herramientas científicas para el estudio de la biotecnología con el uso de algas. Así que, además de su preparación, ¿verdad?, y sus intereses, incluye unos estudios doctorales específicamente en el uso de biología, así que ese es más bien su fuerte. Incluso tiene estudios doctorales directamente desde la Universidad Marie Curie en Francia. Ella ha estado a través de todo el mundo, ha estado en Belgium, en Japón, en Texas, incluso también en Francia, haciendo diferentes estudios. Así que voy a comenzar a hablar en inglés para beneficio del doctor Alok, para que pueda ir enciendo su cámara. Dr. Alok, Arun, you can go ahead and turn on your camera and your microphone so that people at home can see you formally. Hi,
Hi,
how are
buenas
you doing?
tardes. I'm good. How
Buenas
are you?
tardes. Doing well, doing well. So I was just talking to the audience right now that what about your background, your studies, and your main focus on the uses of algae for biotechnology. So you can go ahead and start sharing your screen. Greetings from Ibelis and
Hello, Ibelis.
Abigail are saying hi to you on the chat.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining at 3 o'clock. I know it's time to rest, but I think with a cup of coffee, you all can listen to the talk.
Of course, of course. So you can go ahead and put a full screen. And Dr. Allet, the webinar is yours for your presentation.
Okay, thank you very much, and welcome to everybody who is present here for this session on blue type biotechnology. I have been living in Puerto Rico for around 5 years, but I still have to practice my Spanish. I speak few words in Spanish. But I must tell you that Puerto Rico is very beautiful, people are very nice, and Puerto Rico also offers excellent opportunities to do fantastic research. One of the research areas that I think has not yet been explored in Puerto Rico is the field of algae and the field of algal biotechnology. So today I'm going to talk a bit about algae and the biotechnology that we can associate with algae. But before going into the details of the presentation, I must thank quite some people who have been very instrumental in organizing this event and also in financing our research projects. So first of all, I'd like to thank EcoExploratoria for the invitation, and I must congratulate EcoExploratoria for all the wonderful work that they are doing in the island. We really need such kind of activities to encourage people to come into science. I'm extremely thankful to Corteva Agrisciences for their funding and for their collaboration. In particular, I would like to thank Luis Colon and Jaime Sanchez from Corteva. They have been truly supportive for all our projects that we are carrying out in Inter Barranquitas here in the mountain. Most of the funding that we are receiving for the projects that we are carrying out in our campus is coming from National Science Foundation and United States Department of Agriculture. So I'm really thankful to these two funding agencies. And last but not the least, I'm thankful to the Inter-American campus of Barranquitas and its Chancellor, Dr. Juan Negron, for giving me this opportunity to provide the research that we are carrying out here to all of you. So once again, thank you everyone, and let us get started. So in this 40 minutes of presentation, my goal would be to just make you aware of some basic concepts about alga, what problems alga are creating, what problems we are facing these days with the environmental constraints around us, and how algae or alga, whatever you like to pronounce it, is going to sort of help us in our coming future. So my presentation is I have tried to keep my presentation very non-scientific so that most of the diverse audience can understand it. So when we talk about the core concept of today's presentation, that's blue biotechnology. So some of you might wonder what exactly is blue biotechnology. So blue basically associates with the ocean, and in Puerto Rico we are lucky that we are surrounded by oceanic water. So blue biotechnology is essentially an application of science and technology which is applied to living organisms for production of the knowledge, for production of the goods, and for production of services. So here in the last 10-15 years there has been a huge surge in interest in exploring the marine resources to look for alternative for bioresources. So here on the left of the screen, if you see, whenever we think about availability of the bioresources, what you are basically looking at are the farmland. For example, these farmlands are going to provide you agricultural products like food, for example. You have forest, which also helps you in several ways. You have wilderness, you have freshwater, you are getting some bioresources from freshwater. We have human resources that are essential for basically coordinating all of the different wheels of this cycle, if you would like to say it. And then the oceans. And so my focus of the talk is primarily on how we can utilize bioresources from oceans. And if you look on the right side of the screen, what you see is those same different sources of bioresources and how they are linked to an output. So for example, I was mentioning to you, these farmland are related to agriculture, these freshwater are related to aquaculture. Oceans, when we think of oceans, we are always thinking primarily of fishes and fisheries industry associated with it. But today my focus of the talk is to help you explore other options, other opportunities, other entrepreneurial opportunities that you might find in the oceans. So the idea here is basically to utilize a lot of resources in the ocean and try to generate revenue from the ocean. Why use ocean only as a spot for tourism? Why not try to do some sustainable activities that can help a state like Puerto Rico to generate bioeconomy? So the goal here is how we can link blue biotechnology to a blue bioeconomy. And that link is established by the area of marine biotechnology. So basically, when you think about marine life or marine biotechnology, some of these fascinating pictures come into your mind, isn't it? Like you might be thinking of whales, sharks, for example, starfish, turtles, beautiful corals, and other organisms. So by default, we always think of the animals that are present in marine aquatic system. However, you will be amazed to know that in marine biotech, in the areas of marine life, you also have some wonderful organisms like which look very similar to plants, I would say. Okay, so for example, those organisms that live in the ocean, they could be single-celled. So you might have seen sometime, for example, in ocean or in, let's say, in the lake, for example, some formation of a layer like this, which is basically a biofilm of alga that you can see here. So these aquatic organisms, algae, they can be either single cell, which you can find in some of the areas in fresh and salty water, but many of them are multicelled, meaning they are very big in terms of complexity of the organism. Here, for example, just to give you a representative example, you can see here, this is one algae, which is almost 4 times bigger than the size of a human being. So literally inside this oceanic system, we have forests of these plant-like material, which we can broadly call as algae, okay? And these algae come in different shapes and different size. We call them macroalgae. If they're found in the oceans, they are also known as seaweed, so they are basically synonyms. And they can be fairly simple in structure. It could be from millimeter in size to fairly tall in, like this one, for example, goes up to 40 meters in length in the oceanic bed. So it's like you can see like a forest-like structure. Here are some of the another unique algae that macroalgae, bigger in size, and you can see that the morphology of these different algae are very different. So basically, oceanic system provides you a variety of these macroalgae. So when you look at the definition of the marine macroalgae, and that is the focus primarily of my talk, so these marine macroalgae are plant-like organisms which basically live attached to rock or other hard substances in the coastal or in the deeper oceans. So when you go, for example, to the beach for swimming, you might find some plant-like material which is different in color. And those 3 colors could be primarily either brown, or they could be green, or they could be red. And these classification of the color is primarily based on the pigments that they have. However, sometime in nature, identifying these algae just based on the color pigmentation can be a bit tricky, but usually you can identify them based on these colors. So they are usually attached to a substratum, meaning to a base, or sometimes it could be floating. Some species of algae also float, okay? So as you can look here, the diversity is amazing, and also the colors are so promising and they look so beautiful. When you look at the applications of these algae have tremendous application. For example, one of the most explored area of application has been biorefinery, as in how these macroalgae can be used for several products like chemicals, for biofuels, for gelling agents, for nutraceuticals, for food, and for fertilizer. And through the coming slides, I'm going to give you some examples how we can use this algae for these different types of products. Well, I'm pretty sure that some of you might be aware of algae, but maybe most of you might not be aware of algae. But there was one incident recently in Puerto Rico where we were constantly losing electricity, and everybody was angry on the electricity company. And the electricity company was giving the reason that an algae is basically blocking their cooling filters. And that algae is sargassum, and some of you might have heard about it. So that sargassum is constantly coming on the shores of the Caribbean region, and it is disturbing a lot of bioresources, for I would say, and a lot of bioactivities that are happening around the coastal areas. For example, here is a picture I took from Twitter, which says that in Monabo, for example, these are the babies of leatherback sea turtle, and they need to swim back to the ocean in order to survive. But they got entangled in these massive algal waste, and because of that, they could not go into the ocean, and they died before they could even reach the maturity. So you can see here how these algae sometimes can be a nuisance, and that can affect the biodiversity of an organism. It not only affects the biodiversity of the organism, these massive growth of algae can also impact the property values. For example, if you have a very nice property next to a water body which is filled with algae, I'm pretty sure that the value of that property is going to go down very quickly. Nobody wants to live next to a dingy looking water body. These algal growth also influence the wildlife. For example, here you can see all these colors that you see here. They're all the massive outgrowth of algae, and this is going to impact the wildlife. This certainly impact fishing industry. If you are a fishing enthusiast, you're not going to like it at all. And on top of it, for a place like Puerto Rico, this is also going to impact tourism. So here, this is an example from China, Qingdao City, where you can see a massive outgrowth of algae, which is basically prohibiting people to go to the ocean for recreational activity. So there are a lot of effect when these kind of algae starts to grow in a massive amount. And that massive growth of algae is usually known as blooms, okay? So we can call them algal blooms, or we can, if they're happening in the ocean, we can call them seaweed blooms. So here, for example, you are looking at a seaweed bloom. Here, since this is mostly a freshwater system, so we can call this as an algal bloom. So in Puerto Rico, we are experiencing both. We are experiencing these microalgal blooms in the freshwater system, and we're also experiencing these seaweed bloom on the coasts of Puerto Rico. And you might be surprised to know that these blooms can be sometimes very, very dangerous. And those blooms which are dangerous in nature are usually known as harmful algal blooms. In short, they're also known as HAB. Okay? And these harmful algal blooms occur when toxin-producing algae grow excessively in the water bodies. So some algae are eco-friendly, but some algae have the capacity to produce a lot of toxins which can be very harmful for your health, for the ecosystem as well. Okay? So typically this harmful algal bloom, what happens in this case is there is an excessive algal growth, and this excessive algal growth will become visible to the naked eye, and this can be either green, this can be blue-green, this can be red, or this can be brown, depending on the type of the algae that you're looking at. For example, here if you look at the image that I used from NIH, you can see an green algal bloom, microalgal bloom, happening in one of the freshwater bodies. So of course, one question you might ask yourself, why do these harmful algal bloom occurs? Well, this occurs because of the change in the climatic conditions, the global warming that we're experiencing in these days. Because of that, there is a shift in the temperature, and the shift in the temperature may result in a massive outgrowth of these algae. Okay, they start to produce very fast. In addition to that, there has been excessive water pollution, and that excessive water pollution is also contributing to the excessive bloom of these algae, because we are releasing excessive nutrients as a waste, which is utilized by these algae to grow. And certainly climate change has to play a very important role in this harmful algal bloom. Is this harmful algal bloom dangerous for us? I would say absolutely, depending of course on the algal species that you're talking about and the algal species that is causing the bloom. Yes, it is very dangerous. What happens during this harmful algal bloom is that you perhaps might get fascinated by the color of the water, but then you go and catch fish and then you eat the fish, or you go to swim and perhaps you drink water, and perhaps you are drinking or you are breathing the air that is around that water, and basically you are contaminating yourself with those algal blooms, and they are getting inside your body system. And one of a very classical example was of Lake Erie in Michigan, I think. So this is the geographical map of Lake Erie, and what you can see here, this is a satellite image, and what you are seeing basically here is a massive algal bloom. And this Lake Erie used to provide fresh drinking water, was the only source of fresh drinking water in the area around Michigan. And what happened in I think it was in 2010, a lot of people started to have health complications, and eventually that was linked to this algal bloom. So when you look at the damage or the health effects that these algal blooms can cause on human lives, it's huge, because you can have nerve and muscle damage where your nervous system can be paralyzed or your respiratory system can be paralyzed. You can also have some severe liver issues. But of course, all these diseases and the target tissues is determined by the kind of microalgae that you see on the extreme left here is causing those blooms. These kind of blooms, for example, you can see here that not only occur in fresh water, but they can also occur in the salt water. So next time when you go to a beach or you go to a freshwater system, just make sure that that does not look colorful. And if it looks colorful, definitely tell us and we would come to investigate what is happening there. So as I was mentioning to you a couple of slides ago, we have a lot of bloom going on in Puerto Rico, and that bloom is primarily caused by sargassum, and that bloom is happening in the oceanic coast. If you look at the bloom of sargassum, it is not only happening in Puerto Rico, but it's actually happening in across the entire Caribbean region. And if you look at this geographical satellite map, what you will see here, that these blooms, so here in the middle region, the colorful region, that is the Caribbean region, and you will see that from 2011 to 2018, here if you see the colors, they are very less in intensity, but here if you come in 2018, you can see that the color has changed drastically, which basically indicates there has been a massive growth of these sargassum blooms. So sargassum blooms is increasing on an annual basis, so we need to find some alternatives as to how we can control these sargassum blooms. And these sargassum blooms are not only happening in Puerto Rico or in the Caribbean region, this is happening also in different other continents. For example, this is one of the biggest problem in China. You can see here, this is one individual who is standing in a mess of these algal blooms. So this alga is also a macroalga. This is called ulva. And you can see here how this is basically affecting not only the biodiversity, but also the tourism in China and other areas of the world. So here, this is a picture from Mexico. Mexico government came up with an idea to take out all these sargassum waste, and you can see here people starting to collect them. But what can we do with this massive amount of the biomass of sargassum? We just cannot throw it or dump it in a dump yard. So we have to come with alternative where we can use the sargassum immediately to process it to make a crude product at least, right? And of course, in the meantime, we also have to think about biological questions as to how we can control the reproduction of these sargassum species so that the amount of the sargassum eventually decreases. So when you look at the possibilities of seaweeds like sargassum, you know that any seaweed has a lot of alternative applications which has yet to be explored. For example, we know that we have a very big food crisis, so perhaps these seaweed can provide an alternative for the food crisis. This seaweed can also help us for a resource for more sustainable biofuel, for example. We can use these seaweeds for livestock feed. There was an experiment done in Australia which made a lot of news last year, where they showed in a research paper that if you feed an alga mixed food to these cattle stocks or to these livestock, there is a significant reduction in the amount of methane production. So when there's a significant amount in methane production, that means you're basically controlling also you're contributing at least to reducing the global warming. So there are a lot of products that you can develop from these seaweeds. And to be honest with you, if you look at your life or a daily life, you wake up and you brush your teeth and you use a toothpaste, your toothpaste contains products, or at least the byproducts, that are coming from these seaweeds, for example. Okay, you end your day with a cake or with a pie, for example, and in that also there is a lot of byproducts that are coming from alga. So you are already using a lot of things that are coming from alga on a daily basis, but it's just that you do not know, and you do not know how this can be further explored. For example, here, if you look at this slide, you can see that alga and alga-derived products have been used recently for several things like dairy products, non-dairy products like jams, frozen foods, industrial products. They have been used as medicinal products, as a covering for these medicines. And of course, pharmaceuticals and cosmetic product is also gaining a lot of interest, where people are interested in developing cosmetic products that is naturally coming from these alga-derived samples. If you look at food, Puerto Rico still has not experienced a lot of alga-derived food, but alga-derived food is already very big market in Southeast Asia, and it's really controlling a big market also in Europe. But I'm pretty sure some of you might have tried sushi, and you would be amazed to know that the wrapping that is around the sushi is coming from an alga. Okay, so you are directly or indirectly already exposed to consuming alga. And in the coming slide, I will also tell you why it is good to consume these algal products, which are more nutritious compared to other food products that you're eating on a daily basis. So here are some of the products that you can derive from alga. For example, if you have a chance to go to Japan or to South Korea, you would be delighted to taste a seaweed soup, which is really healthy and very fresh. Excuse me. In addition to food, in addition to industry, seaweeds, or these algae that are coming from the ocean, they also have been used to prepare fertilizers, prepare liquid fertilizers. Okay, they are known by different names like liquid fertilizer. Somebody says a seaweed meal, somebody says a seaweed mineral. So they have different names. Biostimulants, fertilizer formulation. So you can pick your name. Here is a picture, I think, coming from India, where they are showing the production unit where they're producing these alga-derived fertilizer. And when you look at the chemical profile of one of the alga, which is called Kappa ficus, this alga basically contains all the essential hormones that are required for a proper development of a plant, and you can see that the plant grows very well here. The food product the fruits are or the product of the crop is very good. So it seems that these fertilizers are more sustainable in terms of environment, because these fertilizers are coming from algae. So you are not basically contaminating the soil or the water system. So they are more friendly, eco-friendly. A lot of countries in the world have already started to farm these algae on a commercial scale in a very sustainable manner, so that it does not harm the biodiversity of the ocean. So here I'm just showing you some examples from Philippines, where they are using these bamboo shafts. You can see here, and you can see until here that there is like they're treating this area in the ocean as a land to produce a biomass, and that biomass you can see here is being produced, and then eventually this biomass will be processed for making end products. If you utilize the biomass from these algae, you will know that the biomass that is derived from algae is more sustainable and more eco-friendly compared to the biomass that we get from land plants. For example, if you look at the biomass in terms of protein content, or in terms of ash content or polysaccharide content, you will see that if you are deriving some biomass from plants, you mostly get insoluble polysaccharides. But if you are using these algae, either green or red or brown, in addition to the insoluble polysaccharides, you will also get soluble polysaccharides. And you can see here, for example, the amount of protein or the amount of ash that you get from these algae are more compared to what you can get from the plants. So from a bio perspective aspect, utilizing these algae for commercial application is more sustainable compared to utilizing the land plants. So if I summarize all of this into one context, I can, and if I have to tell you why we should study seaweeds, so the first answer would be, it has a higher biomass production per unit area. Because here, if you're trying to produce something in the ocean, you're not limited by the land. Ocean is huge, and so you can produce higher biomass. Since the ocean is open, it has a higher photosynthetic rate, which means that the product or the biomass development would be faster. Ocean is able to sequester almost 70% of the carbon dioxide that is released into the environment. So if we are able to grow more product in the ocean, perhaps that will also help in further increasing the carbon dioxide sequestration and then reducing the global warming. If you're cultivating something in the ocean, you are definitely not competing with the normal traditional agricultural, land-based agriculture food chain. So there is no diversion of food from the human food chain. In addition to that, it also provides employment opportunities, because right now, when you are thinking of producing food, you only think of land-based agriculture. But if you can jump to the oceanic water to produce these products, then you're also going to provide employment opportunities to the marginalized people who are living on the coast, for example. If you're trying to do some cultivation of these algae in the ocean, you definitely do not need to worry about land, and of course never have to worry about water, because water is already there in the ocean and it is rich in terms of nutrition. It also produces considerable amount of food, fuel, and chemicals, and most importantly, in the near future, we hypothesize that the seaweed cultivation will not be affected by events like drought and events like air temperature. If you look at the global seaweed production, and I think this is the data from 2016, so it's a bit old, but in 2016, the seaweed production, or the alga production in the ocean, has a market value of $11.7 billion. $11.7 billion. Okay, and if you look at the volume, it was close to 30 million tons wet. And if you look at the species there, because in the ocean, when you go to the ocean to farm or to explore the different algae that live in the ocean, you will see that there are different species. And here it is a graph showing you some of the species that are cultivated commercially in different regions of the world. So one of the species that might attract your attention is Laminaria, which is grown extensively in Southeast Asia, and Euchema, which have started also to grow in certain regions of United States. So these two basically control the seaweed production in terms of productivity. Okay, here is just a pictorial representation of Laminaria. Okay, but there are other species like Gracilaria, for example, which is 14%, Porphyra 7%, Kappa ficus, and all these different kind of algae are essential for, let's say, for making day-to-day products that you use on a daily basis. If you look at the location of the seaweed farming across the globe, you'll be surprised to know that Asia is the continent leading in the seaweed production. So here, the color that is in red is intensive in the seaweed cultivation. So there's massive seaweed cultivation going on. When you look at the green colors, there is like moderate seaweed farming, and when you look at the yellow, it's more or less, there's hardly any seaweed farming. So most of the area that you will see here are yellow in this map. You would be amazed to know that when you look at this Latin American coast, Argentina and Chile, they also have, in the last 5-10 years, they also have jumped into the seaweed farming, and they are contributing a lot to their economy. Now let's try to think about Puerto Rico. So if you think of Puerto Rico, to the best of my knowledge, there is no seaweed farming going on in Puerto Rico or around this area. So this basically represents an opportunity for the government, for the scientific stakeholders, for the industrial partners to perhaps consider providing funds to explore what is the potential of this seaweed farming in this area. If you look at the market share of the seaweed production, and this is the 2017 data, you see that Asia Pacific controls 60.7% of the seaweed production, and North America has 19%, and Europe is very fast with 10%, and the rest of the world only contributes to 9.6%. So of course there is a massive opportunity to grow in this area. And when you think about seaweed cultivation, it's basically simplistic in terms of design, but of course you have to do some research in order to ensure that you are able to select the best variety of the seaweed species that you want to cultivate. If you look at the system by which you can grow, this is a graphical representation of how you can grow the seaweeds. So this is the oceanic water, and these are some of the seaweed cultivating bed. So you can see here, these are like bamboo or steel rods, and you can basically tie a rope, and on these rope you can put these small tiny algal filaments, and over the time, in like let's say a couple of months, they're going to grow massively in the biomass. And you do not have to provide anything. You don't have to provide fertilizer. There is no input cost, but the output is quite a lot in terms of productivity. So here, this is just one picture taken from internet where you can see the seaweeds growing. Here's another one in a low tide where you can see how the seaweeds are being cultivated. So there is a very standard pipeline for seaweed cultivation. What you need to do is to first identify the seed or the plant species or the species that you want to work with. So this part is usually carried out under laboratory condition to ensure that there is no damage to the environment. Once you have decided which species to cultivate, then you can deploy those lines in the sea. Once you have the cultivation, you can harvest that cultivation by using boat. Then you can do partial drying, and then you can do further downstream processing, and then you can make an end product. Let me tell you that many countries in the world are just interested in buying just this the product at the partial drying stage. So this is when you look at the workflow of seaweed cultivation, this is relatively simple in terms of design, but this needs a lot of attention and a lot of expertise in order to make your production effective. So again, here are some of the pictures from Japan, for example, showing you how these sea cultivations are being done in Japan. Okay. If you look at the expansion in terms of how countries have realized the significance of seaweed industry, you will be amazed to know that over the last 10-15 years, there has been a constant growth in terms of seaweed cultivation across different countries in the world, and also across different species. For example, here you can see there is one microalgal species, Euchema, and you can see that in 2005, the area that it was covering, or I mean the amount of the biomass that was being produced, and if you compare it in 2017, you can see that there is almost 20-fold increase in the amount of the production. So I think at this stage it's a very apt time for Caribbean region to perhaps jump and explore the opportunities that this industry has to offer to the region. So when I came to Puerto Rico, I started a lab of algal biotechnology in Interamericana, and we wanted to answer some basic questions. For example, what is the diversity and the distribution of seaweeds on the coastal region of Puerto Rico? So if you want to work with any algal species, the first thing you would like to understand is how many species you have around Puerto Rico. So try to identify them, and once you have identified them, try to understand their potential using molecular and biochemical techniques. We were also interested to see can seaweeds of Puerto Rico be used as a source for fertilizers, food, and nutraceuticals, and if these seaweeds can be used as a model system to answer some fundamental biological questions that interest scientific researchers. Excuse me for the numbering, I think I just missed two, perhaps it went swimming. Okay, so in order to answer the first question, the diversity and the distribution of the seaweeds on the coastal areas of Puerto Rico, we had a student, Iris Valeria, who was doing master thesis with us. Now she's doing a PhD in Max Planck. So we had two approaches. One was to first identify physically with the bare eyes to see what kind of species we have. So that is called phenotypic identification. So we started phenotyping these algal species. So the plan was we collect these seaweed tissues from different regions of Puerto Rico, and we characterize them using different methods, and we try to identify the sample. But there's always a possibility that if you're just doing a phenotyping assay, or if you're trying to identify the algal species just by your naked eyes or by microscope, you can often have genetic variability that might not be seen by the naked eyes. So there's always nice to take another approach, a molecular biology approach, which can help you to identify the sample. So we took both approaches. So the idea in the phenotyping was we will collect the seaweeds from the several sites. We will bring it in the ice to the lab so that there is no bacterial growth which can possibly contaminate or which can possibly hamper the identification of these algae. So here, for example, this is one collection trip, and you can see they are beautiful algae in different colors. And then we observe it under the microscope to identify the morphological features. And once we have the knowledge about the morphological features, perhaps then we can identify the alga. So Valeria was collecting samples in our lab from different locations. So far we have collected samples from all these locations that are marked in red. So if you find some new algae from the locations that are not listed here, and if you would like to collaborate with us, please let us know. We also collected samples from Atlantic Ocean and the Caribbean Sea, because some of you might know that there is a temperature difference in both these locations, and that shift in the temperature can always increase or decrease the species diversity. So here you can look at the temperature difference in the Atlantic and Caribbean, and this has been corrected for the p-value, so we know that there's a significant difference in the temperature. And there's not only a difference in the temperature, but there is also a difference in the pH. And again, the combination of pH difference and temperature difference can contribute to species diversity. So we did 72 different sample sites, and we collected samples from these sites. We had 13 geographical locations, and we have 2 different oceans. So we had quite some variables. Here are just some of the results to show you how beautiful these algae are. So these are some of the algae, and the names that you see here, we were able to identify morphologically, but the names that you do not see listed on any of these algae, that means we have problem in identifying morphologically those algae at least. So here is an algae which is really interesting that we found also in the coast of Puerto Rico. It's called Asparagopsis. If you remember a few slides earlier, I was mentioning to you, in Australia, they did an experiment by mixing this algae in the cow feed, and they noticed that the methane, the amount of methane production was reduced by almost 40%. So here is again a beautiful slide showing you different species that we have collected from other species, sites of Puerto Rico, and these are green in color, so all of them are green algae, and we have been able to identify some of them, and I'm pretty sure some of you might have already seen some of these structures when you have gone to swim in the ocean. And these are the brown algae. So these are the algae of our interest, in our lab immediate interest, and this is sargassum, which is causing a lot of problem in Puerto Rico. And there are 2 species that we identified from Puerto Rico, Sargassum flutans and Sargassum natans, and we're currently working on these 2 algae. So once we have collected the algae, once we have visually identified these algae, we were not able to identify all of these algae just by morphological characteristics. So we had to do molecular barcoding of these algae. And since the audience here is very non-scientific, so I will just try to explain this in a very simple process. It's basically, we want to identify each of these algae based on DNA that they contain. So we basically identify the species having the unique signatures that they have, and we basically do a barcoding, and you might be familiar with barcoding. Every product in a supermarket is barcoded, so that's exactly what we are going to do in our project. We did another experiment in which we wanted to see if some of these algae that we have collected has some unique distribution of elements, like for example here you can see calcium, potassium and phosphorus, and we wanted to measure the amount of these 3 elements in different algal species. So here I'm showing you just a summarized version to fit in the slide. So you can see here that we identified 3 algal species, Eudothia, Padina and Halmida, which you can see on this slide. They have very high level of calcium shown in blue color, potassium shown in orange color, and phosphorus, well, that's not too much, but at least potassium and calcium are very high. In case of Padina and Halmida, having an excessive presence of calcium makes sense because these are the 2 algae which have calcium deposit on it. So this basically helps us that these three algae can be explored further in future because they have, at least for these three elements, they have an abundance of these elements. So then the next question that we are trying to address in our lab is that can seaweeds of Puerto Rico be used as a source for fertilizer, food, and nutraceuticals? Okay, so I just showed you this map, and there was a lot of this biomass, and we are basically trying to see how we can convert this biomass into something sustainable, something useful. So I will just start here with the sargassum, and this is a picture from Guanica. You can see a golden mat of sargassum floating in Guanica. So we can do several things with these algae, and I'm just going to give you one example where these algae can be used as a source to form bioplastic. So let us say you collect algae and you fragment those algal cells, and these algal cells can be eventually transformed into a bioplastic, and this bioplastic can be used for several purposes. Similarly, if you have a wet paste of alga, this wet paste of alga can be converted into a biomass, into a powder, and that it can be produced into a resin-like material. For example, this can be utilized mixed with proper nutritional supplements for animal feed, for example. We have a collaborator, and I'm just going to show you these two slides of our collaborator who basically has a company named Algae in USA, and they basically collect the waste from the ocean. Right now they're collecting it from China, so all the way from China they ship in containers the algal blooms that I showed you. They bring it to USA, and then they turn that into insoles. So basically these insoles go into shoes. So you can see here that how algae can be used to produce these shoe insoles. And this is the company Bloom, and I hope you can see his picture. His name is Ran. So Ran is a collaborator for our campus, and he's collaborating with some of the projects that we have here. And his company has been successfully able to produce these nice looking foam footwear components from algae. So this is very sustainable in terms of the productivity. So coming back to sargassum, so in our lab we thought, can we utilize these biomass to convert this waste biomass into something meaningful, something useful? So one of the experiments that came into a student's mind, Idalia, who was a former graduate student here, she wanted to see if this algae can be used as a biostimulant or as a biofertilizer. So she collected sargassum from the coast of Puerto Rico, where there was massive. She brought it in the lab. She prepared some extracts. She purified those extracts, and then she treated those extracts obtained from these sargassum on tomato seedlings to see the effect. And she got some very nice results. And if you see here in this on the lower side, you can see that on the x-axis you are seeing the different variables. So here you have control plant in which no sargassum extract was added, but here you have other plants or other seedlings in which sargassum extract of various different concentrations were added. And at least in one concentration you can see at 5% of the extract, you can see that there is a massive growth of the tomato plant compared to the control where the size is very, very small. So it seems that this sargassum extract has the potential at least to accelerate the developmental program of this tomato plant. We have not yet characterized the fruits yet. So at that stage we were interested what could have happened, why this plant started to show such a huge developmental pattern and a huge growth. So we did some experiment, and on the right hand side what you're seeing is a plot which basically tells you how the genes are expressed in different tissues. So here we basically wanted to compare the expression of some genes in the plants that were treated with 5% extract to the control. And we hypothesized that this is happening because some of the developmental pathway related genes are affected, and we were able to observe that. So all the red dots that you see here are the genes that are, let's say, overexcited or they are overproduced. And all the blue ones that you see here are the ones that are less excited or repressed or downregulated in scientific terms. So you can see that we were able to identify at least 2,400 genes that were more present when this sargassum extract was added. So this led us to believe that perhaps the addition of this extract to these seedlings change the expression profile of the genes, which might have helped in the substantial growth of this plant. We are further characterizing it. Another another alga species that we are currently working in our lab is ulva. So ulva is a green macroalgae that is found in the ocean. So Fabiola is an undergraduate student who is working with ulva. Ulva is very big in terms of nutritional profiles. So if you are going to look at 100 gram of organic dry ulva seaweed profile, you will see here that it has 30 gram of protein. So it has 7 times more protein than kale. It has, if you look at the dietary fibers, it has 38.3 grams of dietary fiber, 8 times more than blueberry. And if you look at calcium, for example, it has 15 times more than spirulina. If you look at the magnesium, so it's 103 times more than banana. So if you just eat a portion of ulva, perhaps that could meet most of your dietary requirements on a daily basis. So we are trying to cultivate this algae in our lab using different protocols. And for the moment, Fabiola is collecting different species of ulva, and we are first trying to identify what are the different species of this ulva that is present in Puerto Rico, and then she's going to do the nutritional profile of these different ulva species, and then we're going to select the one that has the maximum nutritional profile, and hopefully in the coming years we expect that we would be able to bring to you ulva salad that you see here that is served, for example, in South Korea and Japan, or perhaps in Southeast Asian restaurants. So this is a very good alternative for nutritional supplement, and that is coming directly from the ocean, and all of these can be cultivated in the ocean. So here I have taken a slide from Wageningen University in Netherlands, which is one of the biggest universities in Netherlands, working on the seaweed cultivation, and this is more or less the model that we also want to use here in our lab and subsequently transfer it into the field, where we are going to cultivate these seaweeds like ulva, for example, in the open ocean, and then we are going to use mechanical systems to harvest it and process it and eventually bring it to you. We are not only going to look for food, but we are also interested in looking for biofuels. So we are in our lab, we are trying to explore some of those aspects as well. The last point is the fundamental questions, if these seaweeds can be used for fundamental questions. So yes, they can be used. So we have one student, Christelle Benik, who's a graduate student working with us, and she's using this beautiful golden color species of brown algae that is called padina. You might have seen it on beaches, and they look like fern. Okay, so this is called padina, and we want to understand if there is an effect of global warming on this species. Why we want to understand global warming on this species is because this is the only species of brown alga on which there is a calcium deposit, an excessive amount of calcium deposit. And we hypothesize that because of the global warming, the calcium deposit is going to decrease over time, and that is basically going to lead to a shorter lifespan of this alga, which will eventually disturb the entire ecosystem. So we have to understand it to further make decisions on how we can save our ecosystems. So that is one aspect that we're exploring, and I think I have just a couple of more slides and then I'll wrap up. We are also interested in the antimicrobial properties of some of these alga, and right now we are currently genome sequencing this alga using combination of PacBio and Illumina sequencing technique. Here, this is just one of the results that Crystal has got so far, where she's trying to see how the distribution of calcium changes when you have different species taken from different location. We can already see that, for example, in this one, there is a sample coming from manatee, number one, and if you look at the calcium deposit on the samples coming from guinea, you can already see that there is a lot of difference in the calcium deposit. Perhaps this could be due to some environmental disturbances, and we are interested in investigating that. Here is just one quick slide to show you that Crystal is also assessing the antibiotic properties of, if not antibacterial properties, let us put it that way, antibacterial properties of padina. And here, all the different color bars that you see here are basically different strains of bacteria, and all the numbers that you see on the x-axis are the antibiotics that has been applied. And we see here that when we use padina, on these different bacterial species, we get more or less the same antibacterial profile as we will get with other different antibiotics. So for example, if you see in E. coli, the bar that you see here is also present when you're using different other antibiotics. So this is exciting, and we are further exploring this. The second question that we have is how organisms become multicellular. So we are also using alga. I think my time is almost up. So we are also using alga. So we are using a single cell alga, and we are trying to induce multicellularity to see if we can understand how organisms became multicellular. It is important for us to understand how organisms became multicellular, because finding the answers can help us to perhaps decipher some mechanism as to how cancer takes place. And finally, we are using algae for tissue engineering, and we basically want to use these materials for making scaffolds which can help in the health sector to form to contribute to the tissue engineering, so that will be more sustainable and more strong. And finally, we have, in collaboration with a lot of different countries, I'm just a member of this big project, the FEO-Explorer Genome Project, in which the consortium is sequencing 41 brown algal species, and we are sequencing the genome of these species. So all of this is essentially going to help us in exploring the algal biotechnology and exploring how these algal biotechnology can contribute to a better bioeconomy. So all of the actions that I described to you takes place in the Inter-American University of Puerto Rico, Barranquitas campus. And here we have a dedicated facility for alga. So we have a lab for alga. We have a pilot experiment station for cultivating these alga. And we have also started, from funds from UNICEF, a microalgae culture collection of Puerto Rico. So right now we have around 18 strains of microalgae collected from Puerto Rico. And in the coming years, we hope to enrich it. And this algae culture collection is available to all people in Puerto Rico. So in summary, what we want to do through this project is to provide opportunities for sustainable supply of food. We hope that in the coming years we would be more carbon efficient, and we can provide business opportunities to the people, and we can do more innovations in Puerto Rico using alga as a tool. So we have some of the courses that can help you to learn more about it. We have an NASA-funded project in which we have a minor concentration in marine biotechnology, so you can get in touch with us for more of it. At the Inter-Barranquitas campus, we are the leading campus in the central region, or I think at least in Puerto Rico, in areas of biotechnology. We have a master's program in plant biotechnology. We have a master's program in industrial biotechnology. We have a bachelor's program in biotechnology. And last semester, we started a PhD program in biotechnology. So if any one of you would like to come and visit our center, we are most welcome. Finally, I'd like to thank these people, Dr. Negron, who is the chancellor of the campus, faculty and staff at our campus for collaborating, and all these different people in our lab who do wonderful work. So thank you very much for your time, and muchas gracias. I will be happy to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alok. That was a great presentation. We have a couple of questions already here. We're a little bit short on time, but we can take a couple of them. So first of all, most people are interested in the overview that you mentioned at the beginning about the benefits of algae, right? That's the motivation behind your research and the economic aspect of it. But we have Deborah here asking that you mentioned that algae has a lot of benefits, but she's questioning what happens to the algae if disasters were to occur. For example, oil spills or radioactive materials get into the water. Like, what would happen then to that intake that we can have? How can it be, damaged?
That's a very interesting question, and a very good question, I would say. So there has been research carried out where they have showed that if there's an oil spill, for example, that is definitely going to affect the biodiversity in that region, not only of alga, but also of all organism that is living inside that. I won't say most, but some of the algae have also a potential for phytoremediation, so say they can try to break down those exposures. Some can also accumulate those exposures, but at this stage I do not have much information on what kind of research has been done in order to answer this question. But this is an excellent question and an excellent line of research to pursue.
Yes, of course, of course. We have another question over here also with that in mind about the use of algae in different aspects and facets of our lives. So Abigail here is questioning, can you use algae as dye, for example, dyeing a clothing or dye in general because of those uses? I don't know if you have the answer for that, but that's the question we have
Yeah,
here.
yeah, that is one of the research that actually we're carrying out here in our lab. Because of short of time, I did not cover it. So most of the algae have a lot of colorful pigments, and those can be harvested to produce natural dyes, and they are more eco-friendly. And if you want to come and visit our lab, we can show you some of the algae which we're currently using to produce dyes. Yeah, absolutely. The answer is yes.
Excellent, excellent. We have here a couple of comments for you. That was an incredible presentation, very interesting topic.
Thank you.
Very grateful for your presentation, and that was an excellent. That says my daddy yes said that.
I'm
And I
glad.
think,
Thank you.
yeah, no, it was. We are very happy that you were able to have this presentation here with us with the Ecoexploratorio and also with their collaboration with Corteva. I think that is a very interesting topic to keep exploring because of that multidisciplinary economic, biochemistry, chemistry, etc. Like all those interdisciplinary topics that can be of relevance to modern problems, so modern solutions to modern problems, right?
Right.
So yeah, so that will be all for today from Dr. Alok. I will proceed to give a final announcement because we also have to announce the winners of 2 tablets that were up for raffle during the week. So I will be proceeding to that. Thank you again, Dr. Alok, for being here on this afternoon with us.
Thank you
And let
so much.
me, of
And I'll just
course,
take your platform to invite everybody who would like to come and visit our campus, because I know that many people do not know that there's a campus in Barranquitas. Let me tell you, this is an absolutely fantastic campus, and you will have great view, lovely food, and we will ensure you that you have a great experience in a visit of the biotechnology facility that we have. So thank you so much once again, okay?
of course, of course. We will make sure to go there and visit Barranquitas because it sounds like a lovely campus.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so I will be popping up my screen right here because I will be sharing my screen real quick. Here it is. So, primero que todo, ¿verdad? Vamos a agradecer nuevamente al doctor Alok por haber estado aquí con nosotros. Voy a estar anunciando las personas ganadoras de unas rifas que estuvimos realizando durante cada día de la semana, ¿verdad? De las sesiones de ciencia virtual. Y pues tenemos ya que los ganadores del martes 12 de octubre fue Kailin Nieves de Florida, Puerto Rico. Así que muchas felicidades para Kailin Nieves de Florida, Puerto Rico, que estuvo participando durante una de las sesiones del martes 12 de octubre y por eso ha sido la ganadora de esta tableta, que puede comunicarse entonces con el ecoexploratorio o va a estar recibiendo un correo electrónico de parte de nosotros para entonces hacer la entrega de esa tableta. Pero eso no termina ahí, gente. El miércoles 13, ayer también, se estuvo rifando una tableta entre los participantes de la sesión de por la mañana y por la tarde. Tenemos una persona ganadora. Y esa persona ganadora de la tableta del miércoles 13 de octubre es Jennifer Ortiz, de Culebra, Puerto Rico. Así que muchas felicidades para también Jennifer Ortiz, de Culebra, Puerto Rico, que ha sido ganadora de una de las tabletas que se ha estado rifando diariamente aquí de las sesiones de ciencia virtual de la edición Semana de la Innovación. Se va a estar entonces comunicando por correo electrónico el proceso de recogido de este premio. Si usted todavía también quiere participar para ganarse una tableta en la sesión de hoy, solamente tiene que haber estado aquí en la sesión de Zoom y automáticamente estaba ya inscrito en el sorteo de la tableta entonces del día de hoy. Para entonces sortearse la tableta durante el día de mañana, pues tiene que estar por lo menos en una de las sesiones a través de Zoom como participante y ahí entonces caería bajo participación en la rifa. Así que espero que tengan mucha suerte en el día de hoy y en el día de mañana, porque Las sesiones del día de mañana son las que están ahora en pantalla. Vamos a tener 2 sesiones de la Semana de la Innovación como culminando esta excelente semana de la agrociencia. A las 11 de la mañana vamos a tener la temática de ciencia en el campo y en el laboratorio con Gladys del Díaz, que es gerente técnico y agrónoma. Y también estará con nosotros a esa sesión Edgardo Santiago, que es científico de investigación de biotecnología. Y a las 3 de la tarde estaremos aquí en Ciencia Virtual con ustedes, celebrando con Corteva 10 años de enseñanza e investigación en biotecnología. Esto va a ser con la doctora Nancy Arroyo González, que es directora del Centro de Enseñanza e Investigación de Biotecnología y Biotecnología Agrícola de la Universidad Pontífica Católica de Puerto Rico. Como les mencioné, durante estas 2 sesiones también se estarán rifando y sorteando, mejor dicho, una tableta al día. También, no solamente en el ecoexploratorio realizamos servicios virtuales, sino que también realizamos servicios presenciales aquí en la exhibición del ecoexploratorio en Plaza Las Américas. Dentro de estas actividades que nosotros realizamos hay una gran variedad. Damos recorridos, damos charlas y talleres, que son los que tenemos aquí en pantalla. Próximamente les puedo sugerir que tomen un screenshot a este calendario que ven en pantalla, porque esos talleres se van a estar dando durante el día, ¿verdad? Asignado. Y todos, la mayor parte de ellos tienen que ver con el universo y el espacio, porque esa es la temática que estamos celebrando durante el mes de octubre. Y por eso mismo también les dejo aquí para que le tomen un screenshot a los eventos que vamos a estar teniendo los fines de semana durante el mes de octubre. El próximo por venir va a ser este sábado, que es el Festival de la Luna y Exploración Espacial, que es de 2 a 4. Y durante la noche vamos a tener un servicio virtual para el disfrute de ustedes de su hogar, de una noche de observación lunar, porque estaremos celebrando la noche, el Día Internacional de la Observación de la Luna. También tenemos, entre otras actividades durante los sábados, que pueden participar, incluyendo una fiesta de Halloween el sábado 30 de octubre. Así que espero ver a todo el mundo disfrazado aquí en nuestra exhibición en Plaza Las Américas. Y como les mencioné, este sábado estaremos celebrando el Día Internacional de Observar la Luna, que va a ser a través de nuestro enlace y nuestro servicio virtual utilizando la plataforma de Zoom y Facebook Live. Si desea apoyar al ecoexploratorio, puede hacerlo de 2 formas directamente. La primera es a través de comprando artículos en nuestra tienda online, tienda.ecoexploratorio.org, donde puede conseguir una gran gama y variedad de productos, pero entre ellos les quiero mencionar y recalcar que estamos vendiendo unas hermosas mascarillas STEM de ciencia, tecnología, ingeniería y matemáticas. Tenemos distintos diseños desde el planeta Tierra, el espacio, cohetes, animales marinos, insectos, anfibios, lo que usted desea. Nosotros tenemos el diseño perfecto y de diferentes tamaños y los puede conseguir en tienda.ecoexploratorio.org. Y la segunda manera en que usted podría apoyar a que el ecoexploratorio continúe creando ciencia divertida para todo Puerto Rico es uniéndote a través de Amazon Smile. Amazon Smile es una plataforma directamente de Amazon donde las compras que usted realice, un pequeño por ciento de esa compra sin que usted pague adicional, es una donación directamente hacia el ecoexploratorio. Si ya usted tiene las compras que usted desea hacer en el mes de octubre, noviembre y diciembre, simplemente en vez de entrar a través de su internet, en vez de entrar a amazon.com, usted directamente puede escribir en su barra de búsqueda smile.amazon.com, escoge al ecoexploratorio como entidad que desea realizar la donación y listo. Cuando usted haga su compra, que tenga las cositas en su carrito, ya el ecoexploratorio va a recibir un por ciento de esa compra como donación directa. Así que ustedes nos ayudan a hacerlo posible. Para más información, tanto del doctor Alok, que lo que habló en el día de hoy sobre las algas y el uso de esas algas en la biotecnología, como de los servicios que nosotros brindamos en el ecoexploratorio, nos puede llamar al 281-9090 o escribirnos a webinar@ecoexploratorio.org, y les exhorto a que nos busquen en nuestras redes sociales, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram y Twitter, y ya tenemos también TikTok, gente. Así que nosotros estamos en todos lados para traerle la ciencia divertida desde la comodidad de su hogar. Mi nombre es Esmeralda y fui la moderadora en el webinar del día de hoy y les recuerdo que mañana también vamos a tener más webinars para culminar esta semana de ciencia virtual, edición de innovación en las agrociencias. Espero que pasen una muy bonita tarde. Hasta la próxima.